Good evening, everybody. Today, I want to do a poem which is called Measurements by the poet Nabakanta Barua. So, the poem is what is known as an allegory. An allegory is a piece of writing like a poem or an essay or a story which has two layers of meaning, two or more layers of meaning. So, on the superficial layer, it seems to be a simple activity, but on a deeper layer, it has a totally different meaning. So, this poem, uh, on the superficial level, it seems to be about a visit to a tailor shop to get some clothes stitched. So the tailor takes the measurements of the neck, the chest, the hands, etc. So it seems to be about a visit to a tailor, but on a deeper level, it goes into our relationships we have with other people. So let's read the poem. It starts with, "It is afternoon now. Let us go to the tailor's to get measured. Measurements of neck, chest, hands, and arms." So, the poet is going to a tailor shop to get some clothes for himself, made for himself, and the tailor will take measurements of the neck, chest, hands, and arms, and measurements of the palm and the heart, right? So, we shall give measurements of the entrails, he says, and the kidney and the liver, give measurements of hormones and affections. So, measurements, measurements has the secondary meaning of evaluations, right? We should be able to evaluate our own strengths and weaknesses in a relationship. It can be a business relationship, it can be a professional relationship, it can be a family relationship, it can be a chance meeting uh, with other people. So, we must be able to evaluate our strengths and our weaknesses to function in a situation, right? So, the tailor will not only take measurements of the neck, chest, hands, and arms, but the poet says we must have evaluations of the palm and the heart. We shall give measurements of the entrails and the kidney and the liver. So, in relationships, things do not always go smoothly. To get the advantage we desire in a situation, we must be able to understand what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages, what are the pros and cons in that situation, right? So we must be able to evaluate ourselves to come to a fruitful conclusion in the situation. So often what happens is when things get hot, when there's friction in the relationship, then all sorts of uh, you know physiological changes take place. The hormones are secreted, the kidney starts to act up, the liver secretes bile, and affections are heated up. So in order to in order to forestall such developments, such unwanted developments, in order to forestall a heated situation from arising, we must be able to evaluate what the advantages we have in a situation, what advantages the second party has in a situation, and we must be able to come to a common ground so that he makes a profit, he get derives profit, and so do I, right? So otherwise, what will happen? Okay, the our blood will boil. That is an idiom. So because of these secretions from the hormone, from the liver, the kidney, and so on, the blood will heat up and will become angry, and the situation we want to bring about may not occur, right? So measurements again means evaluations, right? So it requires a rational, objective approach, right? Rather than an emotional, sentimental approach to a situation, right? So the poet continues in the second stanza: let us give measurements of life, of this and that and several things. So, measurements of life. In life, in a day, we meet so many people. We meet our family members, we meet our friends, we meet our professional associates, we meet our business colleagues, we socialize, and so on and so forth. So, in each situation, we must um, behave well, right? We must see that unwanted friction does not arise, right? So, the poet asks us to evaluate the situations in life, the meetings we have of this, that, and several things. Give only the measurements. So, at as an end result, what will happen is, suppose there is a business deal which has to be undertaken. Now, it is possible for a person to foresee what the other person will, what the second party will do if he says something or does something. It's like a game of chess. Just as we can try to maneuver our pawns, our chess pieces into into a position of power, like that, we a person can also try to um, predict what the second party will do based on what is said or what is done, right? So if it is like that, then the end result, the profit that we wish to derive can also be foreseen. So, as an end result, what we're doing is, if we were to plan a situation like this, we would be giving only the measurements, right? We shall think of the stitching later on. So, just as the tailor takes measurements of us when we go to a tailor shop and thinks of the stitching later on, like that, we have to fill in the details as the situation progresses, right? So, for the time being, let's just give measurements, says the poet. We can only give measurements, so we can only evaluate. We must be sure of ourselves before we try to, uh, you know, do something with others, right? So the poet says, for the time being, let us just give measurements. We can only give measurements. So we can only evaluate. And he continues in the third stanza, we can only take reckonings. Reckonings are the possible outcomes of a situation. Hmm? So, because these evaluations of individuals has not taken place on a very large scale, on a global scale, where the poet says we shall record that suicides have swelled considerably. Nowadays in the news we hear of students, because they could not get into some institution of higher learning, even though they've studied 18 hours out of 24, they think that their future is is bleak and they have no potential, so they end up by taking their own lives. So that is only one such example. And a while ago there was reports of suicides of farmers. All sorts of negative, violent activities against self, against others, are recorded in the news, on social media, uh, uh, everywhere, in the newspapers, etc. Because people have not been able to evaluate their strengths and weaknesses. So, I'll repeat what the poet says. We shall record that suicides have swelled considerably, have increased considerably. We shall give the count of the number of letters in a speech. Right? So, now, this count of letters in a speech, it's practiced in the West. If a leader of a nation delivers a speech, especially during election time, then what the political pundits, what the political commentators who watch these elections do is they count the number of positive words, they count the number of negative words, they count the number of neutral words in the speech to decide whether the leader is in favor of that point is making in his speech, or is uh, against the point is making in his speech. So this sort of counting the number of letters in his speech is also present. Give count of the Christians in Arabia, says the poet. And Christians in Arabia. And so Christianity, the birthplace of Christianity was Jerusalem, and where Jesus was born. So in the 13th century, in the 14th century, what the kings of England did was they undertook the Crusades. The Crusades was supposed to be a campaign uh, to free the birthplace of Jesus from the infidels. Infidels are people who do not follow Christianity. So the Middle East, Arabia, was full of infidels, and the kings of England undertook the Crusades to free the birthplace of Jesus. But actually, in reality, it was to go after the wealth of Arabia, right? And recently there have been one or two Gulf wars where, in 93 the country of Iraq invaded the country of Kuwait. Iraq and Kuwait are major oil producers, and the US sent in its army. The exercise cost $25 billion, and the US sent in aircraft carriers, they sent in warplanes, they sent in hundreds of thousands of troops in order to quell the war. Okay, so on a certain level, it was to stop the war in the Middle East, but maybe it was about the oil. And the second Gulf War also, uh, in which the U.S. Interceded in the Middle East. The second Gulf War may also have been because of oil. So you see, all these situations that have been happening in the world, the number of suicides, the the counting of the letters in a speech, the Christians in Arabia. So we can only reckon, we can only examine, we can only evaluate. So the poet says we can just give measurements, right? So we may not be able to do anything practically about it. So the poet continues, we shall think of the stitching later on, merely think. So we can form an opinion of situations that go on around us in the world, in our relationships, in life. We can only evaluate, we can only think, should I have said that or done that? should I have behaved like that? Should the second person, okay, how can I improve the situation? So, evaluate not only ourselves but also, the second party and so on and so forth. We can only think about such things, um, and maybe we will, because of our rational objective evaluations, uh, achieve something in life. But the poet says, someone after us will measure anew, saying that our measurements have gone awry. So someone after us may see or derive a greater profit than what we ourselves have done, and say that our measurements were not complete, they've gone wrong. So someone after us, maybe our posterity, maybe the younger generations, they will take fresh new measurements, just take measurements. So they may have a deeper understanding of situations, they may go deeply into, the functions of uh, human relations, business relations, personal relations, friends and family relations, and they may just take measurements. But the poet says, as end note, he says, when will someone stitch the garment fit man? Man with a capital M. So the poet wonders, the when someone will stitch a garment to fit the whole of mankind, so that the whole of mankind lives harmoniously, lives congenially with each other, and doesn't commit violence against one another, right? So uh, that is the end note of the poem. When will the whole of mankind live harmoniously without any uh, trials and tribulations? So that is the poem Measurements by Nabakanta Barua. Thank you for listening.